Book Gamma. So we start off with an author's note, or a translator's note, Gamma 1. Aristotle is now in a position to give what is presumably his definitive statement of what philosophy and especially metaphysics is. There must be, he tells us, a science of being just qua being, which will be different from all other departmental sciences, which deal with some limited part of being. The study of being qua being turns out to be the same thing as the study of the primary causes and principles, which has previously been said to be the task of philosophy, because the primary causes and principles are the causes and principles of being qua being. By the way, being qua being just means being as being, right? And back to the metaphysics. There is a kind of science whose remit is being qua being, and the things pertaining to that which is per se. The science is not the same as any of the departmental disciplines, for none of these latter engages in this general speculation about that which is qua, that which is. Rather, they delimit some section of what is and study its accidental features. A prime example is mathematics. We, however, are investigating principles and fundamental causes, and these must evidently pertain per se to a kind of nature. Now, the traditional search for the elements of the things that there are is in fact the search for these very principles. So the elements too of that which is must pertain to it, not accidentally, but qua thing that is. And by the same token, this inquiry also comprises the investigation of the primary causes of that which is qua that which is. Next page. Gamma 2, we have another translator or author's note. So here it is. We have now learnt that first philosophy is the study of the causes and principles of being qua being. However, this will not help us greatly until we have a clear understanding of what being is. This is perplexed by the fact that there is a great variety of accounts of being. But fortunately, there is a common link between them, in that all accounts of being are given with reference to a quote-unquote focal or focal account, which is the account of being as substance. We can, therefore, still more precisely define the task of philosophy as the study of the causes and principles of substance. At the same time, although this is the central task of philosophy, it does not exhaust the business of philosophy, which is interested in the other accounts of being. Though seen from the perspective of the account of being as substance, being is also very closely associated with unity and the one. So it also comes within the remit of the philosopher to study unity and its various related items, such as number, identity, similarity, etc. Also, as we are later told, philosophy will interest itself in plurality, the contrary of unity, since all sciences study contraries and so consider difference, dissimilarity, etc. Aristotle also draws a distinction here between the philosophy which has to do with primary, suprasensible substance and that which has to do with secondary sensible substance. The former is first, the latter second philosophy. It is not clear how exactly this distinction is to be squared with the account of philosophy as the study of being qua being. In the bulk of the metaphysics, and especially in books Zeta and Eta, or Zeta and Eta, the distinction between primary and secondary substance does not seem to play a crucial part. Rather, Aristotle is concerned to get clear about the difficult notion of substance itself, and in a sense, the causes and principles of substance, pretty much as announced at the start of the present chapter. Back to the metaphysics, that's the end of the author or translator's note, so here we are. Now, that which is indeed spoken of in many ways, but it is spoken of with regard to one thing in a single kind of nature. It is not spoken of by homonymy, or homonymy. Its position is similar to that with health, Everything that is healthy is spoken of with regard to health. One thing is said to be healthy by dint of preserving health, another by dint of producing it, another by being a sign of it, another by being capable of having it. Also, with the medical, a thing is said to be medical with regard to the art of medicine. One thing is said to be medical by dint of having the art of medicine, another by being naturally adjusted to it, another by being a function of it. And this, of course, will not exhaust the examples of things spoken of with regard to something in this way. It is it is in just this way that which is, although spoken of in many ways, is nevertheless always spoken of with regard to a single principle. So some things are called things that are because they are substances. Other things are called things that are because they are affections of a substance. Also, some things are so called because they are a way into substance, or because they are destructions or deprivations or qualities of a substance, or productive or generative or of a substance, or of the things that are spoken of with regard to substance, or a negation either of a substance or of one of these latter. And hence we say even that which is not is what is not. Okay, for everything that is healthy, there's one single science. Surely this should be the case in a parallel way with the other things spoken of in this way. For the domain of a single science is not set only by things spoken of in a single respect, but also by things spoken of with regard to a single nature. Indeed, there is a way in which these latter are also spoken of in a single respect. It, therefore, does indeed belong, if this is right, to some single science to study the things that are qua things are that are. Now it is a quite general feature of science that its overriding concern is with its primary object, that on which the rest of its domain depends, and because of which the things in that domain are called what they are. So, if, in the case of things that are, the primary object is substance, then we can state the fundamental duty of the philosopher. It is to gain possession of the principles and causes of substances. Now, every single genus has its own single perceptual range and its own single proprietary science. Grammar, for instance, is a single science covering all spoken sounds. Therefore, there must be some one science single in that to be single in kind that considers how many forms there are of that which is qua, that which is, and the forms of those forms. Now consider this possibility. That which is and the one are the same thing. They are a single nature by dint of their always accompanying one another, as do principle and cause. There will be still no single account by which they are both disclosed. We could, in fact, equally imagine for these purposes that they did have the same account. Far from weakening the position, this would actually strengthen it. It is indeed surely plausible that one man and a man in existence and a man simplicator are the same thing. Nothing is added by the extension of the expression to quote unquote he is one man. And he quote unquote he is one man, that is, it is also clear that these items are not separated either in their coming to be or in their destruction. And the same goes for quote unquote one thing. So it is quite clear that in this sort of case, the addition of words does not change the reference, and that the one is not something else alongside that which is, and that the substance of each thing is non-accidentally a single thing. And the same goes for that which a certain kind of thing is. So there must be as many forms of that which is as there are of the one, and the what it is of such things. The same and the similar and the rest of that sort fall under the same science single in kind, and the opposites are all, in effect, derived from this principle, as we have sufficiently established in the enumeration of opposites. There are, too, as many departments of philosophy as there are substances. which requires that among the latter there must be a primary and subsequent, um, and given that the immediate divisions of that are genera, there will be one science for each genus. Thus, the philosopher has the same sort of project as those known as mathematicians. Mathematics, too, has departments, with a primary and secondary science and a series of studies thereafter. The study, too, of each pair of opposites is the province of a single science. Now, the opposite of the one is plurality. Footnote: a single science studies the negation and privation of a thing because it studies in both ways the single thing that is negated or in privation. There are two ways of negating. Either we can say that a thing does not obtain simplicator or simpliciter, or we can say that it does not pertain to a certain kind. The second way of negating involves the addition of the differentia to the single thing and not just the negating factor, since the negation of a thing in this way marks an absence. By contrast, in the case of privation, some underlying nature also arises, whose privation is said to be. That's the end of the footnote. Back to the metaphysics. As we were saying, plurality is the opposite of the one. So the science we have specified must also cognize the opposites of the things that we have mentioned. The other, the dissimilar, and the unequal, and such other things as are spoken of either in relation to one of these or in relation to plurality and the one. And opposition itself is one such thing. For opposition is a kind of differentia, and the differentia is an otherness. Since, then, the one is said in many ways, these things too will also have been said in many ways, and yet it belongs to a single science to take cognizance of them all. It does not suffice for them each to fall to different sciences, just that they are spoken of in many ways. For that it is also necessary that the accounts have neither single aspect nor single reference connection. In any case, everything is connected to the primary. So all things said to be one are connected to the primary one. Ditto or ditto for the same, the other, and the opposites. So once we have distinguished in how many ways a thing is spoken of, we must demonstrate in what way it is spoken with regard to that which is primary in each relevant category. And some things will turn out to be thus related by dint of comprising the primary, others by a dint of producing it, and others in other similar ways. The conclusion of all this is very clear. There must be some one science that gives an account of all these items, and that also gives an account of substance. Substance, in fact, was one of the puzzles that we looked at, and the philosopher should be able to engage in the study of all these items. For who, except the philosopher, is going to ask whether Socrates and Socrates, seated, is the same thing? Who is going to ask whether one is opposite to one, or indeed what the opposite is, and in how many ways it is spoken of? And the same goes for all the rest of such items. They are all per se properties of that which is one qua that which is one, and of that which is qua that which is. Not qua numbers or lines or fire. Of course, it is the task of philosophy to get to know both their essence and their accidents. The shortcoming of current examinations of these topics is not their failure to be philosophy, but the priority of substance, on which the current philosophical consensus has no view. There are affections peculiar to number qua number. Examples are oddness and evenness, commensurability and equality, excess and deficiency, which pertain to the number both per se and in mutual relation, and there are similar lists for the solid, the unchanging, the changing, the weightless, and the weighted. And in just the same way there are peculiarities of that which is just qua that which is, and it is the truth about these that the philosopher is after. A pointer to this is the fact that dialecticians and sophists prenet or prenet or prenet sorry I can't even pronounce that, sorry. I learned this philosophies. Yeah, I can't pronounce that. Sophistry is but philosophy in appearance only. And the scope of dialectic is every item, which all have in common only that they are things that are. And in fact, it is quite clear that this breadth of dialectic debate is motivated by the fact that all things that are proprietary to philosophy, sophistry, dialectic philosophy, they all have the same genus as their domain. But philosophy differs from dialectic in the manner of its powers, and from sophistry in the choice of life that it involves. A dialectic experiments with the topics on which philosophy gives knowledge, while sophistry bears the appearance of philosophy but not the reality. Now, one of the two columns of opposites is always the privation column, and all the items in both columns are derived from that which is and that which is not, from one and plurality. An example is stasis is derived from one and movement from plurality. But it is also true that almost everybody agrees that the things that are and substance are composed of opposites. At least everybody claims that the principles are opposite. Some have it that they are odd and even, some that they are hot and cold, some limit and limitless, some love and strife. It needs no demonstration that all the others are also derived from one and plurality. Let us not linger over the derivation, and even principles proposed by other schools fall naturally into these kinds. So this is yet another way of showing that there is a single science for that which is qua that which is. For all things are either opposites or derived from opposites, and the principles of the opposites are one and plurality, and the opposites, whether spoken of in single aspect style or not, are the province of a single science. The latter is no doubt more plausible. And yet, even if the one is spoken of in many ways, the opposites will be spoken of with regard to the primary, and so also with the opposites. And this even if that which is and the one is not general, and the same in all cases or separable. It is in fact probable that they are not, and that some are single aspect whilst others form a series. And given all this, it is also hardly surprising if it is not incumbent on the geometer to study what the opposite is, or what the complete or one or the same or other, save ex hypothesi, some firm conclusions can be drawn. A single science has at its domain that which is qua that which is, and also its properties qua that which is. This science concerns itself with both substances and their properties, all those we have mentioned, and also prior and posterior, genus and species, whole and part, and all other such. We have a author or translator's note. So, Gamma 3. Aristotle has now shown that philosophy is concerned primarily with substance, but also with the other accounts of being and with unity and plurality and their related items. He now adds to this list that philosophy is also the study of the fundamental principles of demonstration and logic. In making this addition, he is resolving the dilemma posed by Puzzle 2 of Book Beta, page 51. The reason why it falls to philosophy to study the fundamental principles of logic is that these principles are not concerned with some specific departments of being, such as the departmental sciences study, but with being as a whole, the province of philosophy. It is true that non-philosophers, especially natural scientists, have taken an interest in the past in the foundations of logic, but in so doing, they have been wearing the hat not of the scientist but of the philosopher. In any case, being is wider than nature, so that the natural scientists would not be competent to study something that applies to all of it. The rest of Book Gamma is, accordingly, devoted to the defense of the fundamental principles of demonstration. Aristotle evidently feels that it will not be possible to be certain about the conclusions later to be drawn about substance, unless the principles of demonstration itself have first been vindicated. He begins in this chapter by declaring that the most fundamental principle of all is the principle of non-contradiction, about which it is not even possible for us to be deluded. The principle states that it is impossible for the same thing to have and not to have the same feature at a single time. and it is the principle upon which all the other principles of demonstration ultimately rest. That is the end of the author's note. And here we back to the metaphysics. Here is another issue to be decided. Is there one science both for the so-called axioms of mathematics and for substance, or different ones for each? In fact, the answer is clear. A single science, that of the philosopher, also covers the axioms of mathematics. Mathematical axioms, too, apply to all the things that there are, after all, and not separately to some genus of things demarcated off from the others. They are also available to every departmental science, since they are of that which is qua that which is, and of every genus of that which is. But the use made of them by each departmental science is only to the extent that is sufficient for its purposes. Just in regard to the genus for which that science produces its demonstrations, there is, then, no question but that mathematical axioms apply to all things, just qua things, that are. They constitute indeed the commonality of things that are. So the science that gets to grips with that which is qua that which is will also be the science of mathematical axioms. Hence the fact that no departmental science takes a view on the truth or falsity of these axioms. Geometry does not, neither does arithmetic. Some natural scientists do, but that's okay, since they, and only they, conceive themselves as studying nature as a whole, and thus the domain of that which is. However, there is a science higher than natural science, for in truth nature is but one genus of that which is. It is a science whose subject matter is universal, and which is exclusively concerned with primary substance, and it is also concerned with the axioms of mathematics. Natural science is a kind of philosophy, but it is not first philosophy. Fitful discussion proceeds about the way in which the truth of the axioms of mathematics should be taken. This debate reflects the poverty of current logical training. Knowledge of mathematical axioms should be a propedeutic to philosophy, not something you pick up while doing it. What is quite clear is that philosophy, whose domain is the whole of substance in regard to its essential nature, must also examine the principles of logic. The specialist in each genus ought to be able to give the securest principles of his domain. So the specialist, so the quote unquote specialist in the thing that is qua, the things that are should be able to give the securest principles of this domain, of everything, and this quote unquote specialist is the philosopher. And the securest principle of all is that about which error is impossible. And this sort of principle must also be that which is most completely known, since it is about the unknown that error occurs, and it must also be non-hypothetical. Anyone studying anything of the things that are must grasp this principle, and to say that is to say that it is not a mere quote-unquote hypothesis. And if a principle is such that anyone who is to know anything must grasp it, then the approach to any subject matter presupposes mastery of that principle. It brooks then no discussion that this sort of principle is the most secure of all principles. The question is, which principle is this? It is, we are now in a position to say, the principle that P, it is impossible for the same thing at the same time both to be in and not to be in the same thing in the same respect. This will bear some logical sharpening, but let that pass for now. Here, indeed, we have our securest of all principles, which entirely fits the standards that we have set for it. No one can believe that the same thing both is and is not. On one interpretation, this is the point that Heraclitus was making. What, of course, is not impossible is that one can say one thing and believe another. It is, then, not possible for opposites to be in the same subject at the same time, again with the usual logical provisos, but also the opinion opposite to an opinion is the negation of it. And this makes clear why it is impossible for the same person to believe that the same thing both is and is not at the same time. For if one were to fall into such error, it would amount to the simultaneous holding of opposite beliefs with regard to that object. And that is why this principle is the ultimate root of all demonstration. It is its very nature to be the principle of all other axioms. We have another author's note or translator's note, Gamma 4. Aristotle now begins his remarkable defense of the principle of non-contradiction. It might be felt that so fundamental of a principle cannot be defended, but must simply be accepted as the foundation of all reasoning. But Aristotle, while allowing that it cannot be demonstrated in any normal sense, since a demonstration would have to proceed from some still more fundamental principle, and this would generate an infinite regress, nevertheless offers a demonstration by refutation. The idea is that if anyone denies the principle from whatever direction, he can be refuted, and the totality of such refutations amounts to an indirect demonstration of the principle. What is required is, in fact, not even that the opponent explicitly denies the principle, but merely that he says anything at all. If he refuses even this, he rules himself out from having anything to say about the foundations of logic, or indeed anything else. But if he does say something, he is committed to what he says being true and not false, in line with the very principle which he is supposed to be denying. Aristotle hammers the point home with an extraordinary array of arguments. And that is the end of the author's note. Translator's note. Also from me, Aristotle is one of the most early conceptions where you can see someone using a transcendental argument for, the principle of non-contradiction. You can find the earliest transcendental arguments in Aristotle. All right, back to the metaphysics. For all that, it is certainly the case, as we have been saying, that there are some philosophers who hold both that it is possible for the same thing to be and not to be, and that it is possible for us to entertain beliefs to that effect. These claims are used as premises, furthermore, by many natural scientists. Nevertheless, as far as we are concerned, the present argument has shown that the same thing cannot at the same time both be and not be. And indeed, we have gone on to show that this is the securest of all principles. Amazingly, there are even philosophers who try to prove this. This reveals their innocence of logical training. A major point of such training is to be able to recognize which subject matters require proof and which do not. After all, it must be true quite generally that not everything can be proven, on pain of an infinite regress, which would in any case undermine the proof. And if there are to be some premises for which it is not appropriate to require proof, these philosophers would be quite unable to give reasons for any other principle to be more of this kind. However, the impossibility of the denial of our principle can in fact be proven. It can be done by the elenchic or elenchis, provided only, of course, that the disputant advances some kind of proposition. Should he choose not to, there is something comical about seeking to refute, and just in that respect, a position that has absolutely no content of any kind. It would be like taking issue with a vegetable. Now we must carefully distinguish between demonstration by means of an elenchus and demonstration if that's how you pronounce it. If, in this case, one attempted a straightforward demonstration, one would be presupposing, at the start, the very principle to be defended. If, however, the other party advances a comparable first principle, this problem does not arise. One can simply deploy the elenchus, or elenchic, rather than assay a demonstration. And the way to start to deal with anything like this is not to demand a statement either that something is or that it does not. This might well be taken to be begging the original question. Rather, it is to require that he say something with content both for himself and for anybody else, a necessary minimum for any statement. If he will not do this, then his position admits of no rational defense against internal challenges, or those of anybody else. If once, however, he does make this first meaningful statement, there is something definite enough to get to grips with, and the proof can proceed. but the whole process has not been initiated by the conductor of the proof but by its victim, since it is by the elimination of his initial statement that he comes to accept the correct amount. Also, anyone who accepts the challenge will eo ipso have agreed that there is something true independently of proof. As a result of all this, it will not turn out to be the case that everything is such that it is in a certain way and also is not in that same way. Here, then, is how our proofs. Here, then, is how our proof proceeds. Uh, first, First assumption: we take it to be self-evident that the locution "to be," quote unquote, "to be," and the locution, quote unquote, "not to be," both have a definite meaning. This, I think, rules out at least the possibility that everything both is in a certain way and is not in the way. Elucidation: suppose the locution, quote unquote, "man" has a definite meaning. Let us say that this is, quote unquote, biped animal or biped animal. Then what is meant by, quote unquote, having a definite meaning is just this: if some arbitrary item is a man, and if there is something that you have to be in order to be a man, then this will be what it is to be a man for that item. Footnote: in fact, it makes no difference even if one allows there to be several meanings to these locutions, provided that the number is indefinite, for a different locution could be assigned to each account. In the present case, if we denied that, quote unquote, "man" was univocal, and that for one of its several meanings the proprietary account was, quote unquote, biped animal or biped animal, it would still be perfectly possible for there to be a definite plurality of other meanings, just by the assignment, of a proprietary locution for each account. Were, on the other hand, these assignments not to be made, and the number of meanings to be infinite, then we would not in effect be dealing with a possible ingredient in a proposition. For this kind of non-univocality is meaninglessness, and if locutions have no meaning, mutual communication is eliminated. As also, to tell the truth, is internal consistency of thought. A man cannot think unless he thinks of some single thing. And if such thought is possible for him, what is to stop the assignment of a locution to this object of his thought? That is the end of the footnote. Well, given all that, we may as well revert to our original supposition that the locution has a meaning and that it has only one meaning. This rules out the possibility that by, quote unquote, "to be a man," whatever, quote unquote, "not to be a man" is meant, provided, quote unquote, "man" not only has meaning in regard to a single thing, but has the meaning of a single thing. It is not meaning in regard to a single thing that we consider to be having a single meaning. Were we to make that equation, quote unquote, "the musical," quote unquote, "the white," and, quote unquote, "man" might all have meant a single thing, a semantic shortcut by dint of their synonymy to monism. We can say further that it will only be possible for the same thing to be and not to be by dint of a homonymy. Example is what we call, quote unquote, "man," others would call, quote unquote, "not man." But our present question is not whether it is possible for the same things to be and not to be in regard to the locution, but whether it is possible in regard to the object. But if quote unquote "man" and quote unquote "not man" do not mean something different, it cannot be denied that quote unquote "not to be a man" will mean just the same as quote unquote "to be a man. And this will mean that quote unquote "to be a man" will just be quote unquote "not to be a man. Since they will be a single thing, that is what it is to be a single thing. After all, it is to be like quote unquote raiment or raiment and quote unquote cloak, assuming that their proprietary account is one. And if to be a man and not to be a man are a single thing, then quote unquote to be a man and quote unquote not to be a man have a single meaning. However, a proof has been offered of their not meaning a single thing. And so it is necessary that if it is right to say of anything and that it is a man, that thing must be a biped animal, what quote unquote man meant. And if this is necessary, then it is not possible for the same thing at the same time not to be a biped animal or biped animal. That is the force of saying that something is necessary. It is to deny the possibility that it not be the case. So we have our proof. It is not possible to say truly at the same time that the same thing both is and is not a man. Exactly. The same reasonings can be used on quote unquote not to be a man. Quote unquote to be a man and quote unquote not to be a man mean different things on the assumption only that, say, to be white and to be a man are different. After all, the former pair are much more directly opposed, which would bring with it their meaning different things. If, in face of this, the tack is taken that quote unquote the white and quote unquote man do mean a single thing, the same thing indeed, we will simply redeploy the argument given above that this leads to monism. For everything, not just opposites, assuming this cannot be right, the argument goes through as described. All that was necessary was to get an answer to the following to the first question. Another dodge might be as follows: we put the question without qualifications, but our opponent, in replying, adds the contradictories. But this just means that he is not, in fact, replying to the question at all. For on these assumptions, there is nothing to stop quote unquote man and quote unquote white and endlessly many other things being the same. No, we must insist that to the question whether it is true that a given object is or is not a man, an answer that means a single thing must be returned. We cannot accept the addition of, say, quote unquote, it is also white and large. It is indeed impossible to go through all such accidental properties of the object, and we are quite entitled to insist that our opponent add all or none, and it follows in exactly parallel style that even if the same thing is in 1,000 ways both man and not man, it is still not acceptable. As part of a reply to the question whether or not it is a man, to add that it is also simultaneously not man, unless the respondent is prepared to add all the other accidental properties too, which the entity either is or is not. To attempt this last project would be to drop off the map of philosophical debate. A more general complaint can also be raised. It is that the adoption of this theory carries with it the elimination of substance and essence. In effect, it commits you to saying that all properties are accidents and that there is nothing which it is to be a man or an animal. For suppose that there is something which it is to be a man, this will not be to be a non-man or not to be a man. I take it that these are the negations. After all, there was a single thing that quote unquote man meant, to wit, the substance of a certain thing. And to have the substance of a certain thing as meaning is to have the meaning that nothing else than that is what it is to be that thing. If, however, in the present case, to be a man just is either to be a non-man or not to be a man, then it will be something else other than what it is to be a man. And that is why this position ends up saddled with the consequence that there cannot be a proprietary account of this kind of anything. Hence, all properties are accidents, given that it is in terms of a proprietary account that we draw the distinction between substance and accident. So the white is an accidental property of a man, inasmuch as the man A is white, but B is not what it is to be white. But this is a disastrous result. If all predication is accidental, there will be no primary subject. assuming that in all cases an accidental property indicates a category item pertaining to some subject. Sorry, the absence of such a subject produces straight off an infinite regress, but such a regress is also impossible. There cannot be concatenation even of more than two accidents. Argument A. An accident is not an accident of an accident, except in that they are both accidents of the same subject, in the sense that white is accidentally musical and musical accidentally white, in that they are both accidental properties of a man. B. When Socrates is musical, this is not because Socrates and musical are accidental properties of something else. So there are these two ways in which things are said to be accidental properties. Now, 1. Things said to be accidental properties in the way that white is said to be accidental to Socrates, be accidental, cannot extend upwards to infinity, by dint of there being an accidental property of Socrates, white, and so on. No single thing will emerge from such a pillar of predicates. But also, 2, there will be no further a accidental property just of the white, say, the musical. There is no reason for saying that the musical is a accidental to the white any more than that the white is a accidental to the music. And even if this is denied, we fall back on the distinction between this a accidentality and b accidentality, for example, musical to Socrates. For all b accidents, being an accident of an accident is ruled out. It is only for a accidents that it is possible, and this precludes it being the case that every property is predicated accidentally. The point is, even on these assumptions, there must be something that indicates substance. But once this is conceded, we have a proof that the simultaneous predication of contradictories is impossible. Okay, if all contradictories are simultaneously true of the same thing, we can take it as settled that we get monism. A trireme, a wa and a man will be the same thing. If for anything at all, it is possible both to assert and to deny any given claim. Anyone who signs up for Protagoreanism has to bite this bullet. It suffices, after all, for someone to think that the man in question is not a trireme for it to be indisputable that he is not a trireme. But this just trireme. But this just means that he is a trireme if the negation is as true as the assertion. In fact, we get not just Protagoreanism, but Anaxagoreanism, the doctrine of quote-unquote all things at once. Nothing really exists as a single thing. The best interpretation is that the present view is really about the indeterminate. They are deluded in thinking that they are talking about what is. In fact, they are talking about what is not. Anything that is in potentiality and not in intellecti is the indeterminate. The result is that they are committed to the joint assertion and denial of every property of every subject, on pain of the absurd consequence that, for each subject, the negation of the subject itself is available, but not the negation of something else which is not a property of it. Let me clarify this from the present example. If it is true to say of a man that he is not a man, then it is evidently also true to say of him either that he is or that he is not a trireme. So if the assertion can be made, then so too can the negation. Whereas if the assertion cannot be made, then at least the negation corresponding to it will be available to a greater extent than the negation of the thing itself. So if the negation of the thing itself is available, as our opponents claim, then so too will be that of the thing man's being a trireme. And if the negation of this can be made, so too can its assertion. Well, this is what happens if you adopt this crazy view, and you also lose the exclusive dichotomy of assertion and negation. If it is true that something is both a man and not a man, it will also, of course, be true that it is neither a man nor not a man. There are two negations of the two assertions, And if the first of the assertions is treated as a compound of two, then the second two would be a single opposite compound. Also, either this is true of all subjects and everything both is white and is not white, and both is and is not, and so pari passu for all other assertions and negations, or it is not, but rather true of some but not of others. Now if A, it is not true for all assertions, then those for which it is not true will have to be conceded to us, while if B it is true for all, then either 1. Wherever assertion is true, so will negation be, and wherever negation is true, so will assertion be. Or 2. Wherever assertion is true, so will negation be. But it will not be the case that wherever negation is true, so will assertion be. Now in B2, it would turn out that there is something which brutally is not, and the corresponding belief will be a secure one. But if a belief that something is not the case is secure and perspicuous to the mind, then the opposite positive assertion would be still more perspicuous. However, if B1 is right, then necessarily either you get a true statement by disjoining the terms, so one says that a thing is white and also that it is not white, or you do not. And if A, you do not get true statements by disjoining the terms, then it follows that the position under attack has shifted and nothing exists. And then the question is how non-existence could do things like speaking and walking. On top of that, all things will be one, see above, and man, God, trireme, and stone will be the same thing, as also will their contradictories. After all, assuming contradictories operate in the same way for all subjects, there can be no difference between subject and subject in this respect. If there were a difference, then that would be something true and a special property. But if B, it is possible to get true statements by disjoining the terms, then the consequence we have claimed goes through and is crowned by further consequences that all men speak the truth, and that all men are in error, and that the holder of the view is himself acknowledging that he is himself wrong. Nor does this prevent its also being the case that the debate is about nothing at all. Our opponent is still saying nothing. He speaks in neither one way nor another, but speaks in both ways at the same time. And, of course, at the same time, he is negating both these and insisting that he is speaking neither in one way nor in the other. If he does not do this, then he is stuck with something definite one way or the other. If, furthermore, it is the case that whenever the assertion is true, the negation is false, then it will not be possible both to assert and to negate the same thing truly at the same time. Perhaps, however, the opponent might make the rejoinder that whether this is so was all along the real question. Can it, also, be that anyone who believes that something must either be or not be in some given way is embroiled in falsehood, or is anyone who thinks that it is both has the truth? For if such a person does have the truth, what would be the content of the claim that the nature of the things that are is of this kind? And if he does not have it, but at least has it to a greater extent than the holder of the former belief, then even so there would be some definite way in which the things that are. And this would be true and not also at the same time not true. If, however, the holders of any view all speak both truth and falsity in exactly the same way, it will not be possible for anyone in these circumstances either to give utterance or to say anything of content. For such a person is at the same time saying that such and such is the case and that it is not. And if he has not serious belief anyway, but is merely equivalently both entertaining and not entertaining a thought, in what respect would he be at an advantage over mere plant life? All this makes it especially clear that nobody is really in these circumstances, neither any of those who advance this argument, nor anybody else. Why, after all, if someone thinks that he should walk to Megara, does he actually do so rather than merely twiddle his toes? Why does he not just get up first thing and walk into a well, or, if he finds one, over a cliff? In fact, he seems rather careful about cliffs and wells. He, for his part, does not seem to think that falling into or over one is no more bad than it is good. On the contrary, he is of the settled opinion that one outcome of the cliff/well episode is better than the other. But his dogmatism will immediately embroil him in holding that one item is a man, and that some other thing is not a man, and that one thing is pleasant, and that some other thing is not pleasant. Anyone who thinks that it is preferable in some um, circumstances to drink water and to see a man, and attempts to do these things, is not someone framing his strategies and beliefs on the basis of comprehensive global indifferentism. And yet, that is just what their basis would be, if indeed both man and not man are the same thing in the same way. In fact, however, as we have labored to proclaim, you do not come across all that many people of whom it is not true that they carefully avoid some possibilities, or are showing the most extravagant insouciance, if that's how you pronounce it, towards others. So it would seem that there is at least one area where the disposition is pretty universal to suppose that things are one way or the other. The area of bottom line, good or bad, and if you say that they do not know but merely have opinions, so much the worse. They should be all the more concerned that their opinions are true. Just as someone who is ailing is likely to be more concerned about his health than someone in the pink of it. Besides, the knower, the opiner, is in a poor way, or is that say opiner is in a poor way as far as truth is concerned. One final argument. Okay, let us suppose as much as you like, that things are always both thus and so, and not thus and so. Still are the greater and the lesser present in the nature of the things that are. After all, we would not say that 2 and 3 are even to the same extent, and the man who mistakes a tetrad for a pentad is not as erroneous as he who takes it for a chiliad. But then, if they are not equally erroneous, this can only mean that one has less, and so one more, of the truth. But now, if to have more of something is to be closer to the thing of which you have more, then there will be indeed a kind of truth closer to which is the one who has more of it. And even if that is not the case, there is at any rate something here more like the truth, more grounded, and that is enough. With what we have dispensed with that indifferentism which would block us from arriving at any definition in our thoughts. We have an author's note or a translator's note. Gamma 5. Here's the author's note. The demonstration continues, becoming more specifically directed against particular opponents of the principle. The most important of these is Protagoras, whose relativism entails the rejection of the principle. Aristotle also distinguishes between objections to the principle based on genuine reflection on natural phenomena and objections based on purely, quote-unquote, heuristic or gratuitous arguments, or gratuitous, if that's how you pronounce it. The latter are actually harder to refute, since it is necessary to descend to the level of the opponent. The bulk of the chapter is taken up with arguments against those who suppose that the principle is in some way undermined by the fact that, with sensible entities, contrary features appear to be both based on the same subject, and also with arguments which in some other way question the principle on the basis of the observation of nature. Aristotle reviews a wide range of earlier thinkers, including Homer, before concentrating his fire on Protagoras himself and his followers. Alright, back to the metaphysics. That was the end of the author's or translator's note. So, the same opinion is the basis of the position of Protagoras. His position, and that just examined, must stand or fall together. For one, if all opinions held and all appearances are true, then they must all be at the same time both true and false. It will often happen, after all, that two men hold opposite opinions, such that they think that those who do not believe as they do have lapsed into error. And this can only mean that the same thing is both true and not true. But also, too, on this assumption, all opinions held must be true. The right believers and the wrong believers believe opposite things, so that if the things that are as supposed on this view, they must both believe truths. There can then be no dispute, but that both positions. I don't know why I keep saying propositions, but sorry, that both positions stem from the same basic mindset. But this does not mean that they are all to be dealt with in the same way. Some need persuasion, some compulsion. Some philosophers have taken up taken up this sort of position out of sheer perplexity. Their ignorance can be easily alleviated. The treatment applies not to their argument as such, but to their mindset. Others, however, adopt the position for vexatious purposes. For this, the treatment is refutation of the actual words spoken. Using the very same terms as the opponents, if we consider those motivated by genuine perplexity, we find that they were driven to this view by considering the sensible object. One way of being driven to the view is by observing that opposites arise from the same sensible thing, concluding that statements and their negations or contraries must simultaneously be true. The argument is that which is not cannot come into being, so the sensible object in question must have antecedently existed as both the things that it is. Hence Anaxagoras' mixture of all and all, and Democritus' variation on the same thing. For him, the full and the empty are similarly present in all parts, and these correspond respectively to what is and what is not. The way to deal with anyone basing his opinion on this sort of consideration is as follows. They should be told that in a way they are right and in a way wrong, that which is spoken of in two ways, so that there is a way in which it is possible for something to come to be from that which is not, and a way in which it is not possible. By the same token, the same thing can be both a thing that is and a thing that is not, only not in the same respect. In potentiality, a single thing can be simultaneous opposites. In actuality, however, it cannot. On top of this, we invite them to accept that there is a certain other substance pertaining to the things that are, a substance characterized neither by movement nor by destruction nor by coming into being in any way. Another way of getting to the truth equal appearance doctrine from observation of sensibles is this. You start by insisting that the judgment of truth is not an appropriate matter for majorities and minorities. Then you allow that when two men taste the same thing, one will very often find it sweet and the other bitter. Suppose then that all men were sick or deranged, save one or two who were healthy and of right mind. It would then be the latter two who would be thought to be sick and deranged, and the former not. In the same vein, many animals have sensory impressions quite at odds with ours, and about the same objects. Nay, the self same individual can be at odds with himself as to whether he takes the same matters of appearance to be true at all times. But there can be no principled way of deciding which of these various impressions is true and which false. It seems that none of them is any better placed than the others. They are all in the same boat. Hence the dichotomous conclusion of Democritus: either there is no truth, or it is concealed from us. The underlying assumption of this whole approach is as follows. Discernment is identified with perception, and perception with the alteration of the sensory organ. That is why they say that what appears in sensation must be what is true. That is the reasoning that led Empedocles and Democritus, and let's face it, all the rest of them into these erroneous doctrines. Empedocles certainly signs up for the view that any state change is a cognitive change. Quote unquote, for from what stands before him is the thought of man increased. Somewhere else he has, quote unquote, so far as into other states they came. New thoughts presented wisdom to their minds. Parmenides, for his part, has the same ring to him. Quote unquote, for as at each time lie the jointed limbs, so is the mind of man configured. No other organ is it but the limbs, that thinks for every man, for every one, and thought is what is more. An apothegm, or if that's how you pronounce it, is also to be found among the obiter dicta of Anaxagoras. He pointed out to those of the company, as far as they were concerned, things would be just as they thought. And for heaven's sake, let's not forget Homer, who, we are told, espoused this same line. Does he not, after all, have Hector, of all people, in his recovery of consciousness after Ajax has floored him, lie there, quote unquote, thinking other thoughts? What can this mean except that those whose thinking processes have been radically disrupted are, for all that, still thinking, only their thoughts are not the same? But then, surely, if both states involve kinds of thought, things in existence must also both be so and not be so. For if those very people who have gazed most on the truth as it is revealed to us, those who have devoted their lives to the search for truth, those who love the truth, if this is what they think or at any rate officially say about the truth, how can that be anything other than a counsel of despair for anyone trying to start to do philosophy? If anything like these views is right, the quote unquote search for truth is a wild goose chase. Let us then diagnose this error. The thinkers in question were after the truth about the things that are, but they supposed the things that are to be restricted to the sensibles. But in these there is a large presence of the indeterminate, and of that which is in the way explained above. Hence the positions is far from absurd, but also far from true. Felicitously, if that's pronounced again, to adapt the dictum of Epic, Epicharmus on Xenophanes, Xenophanes. Another line of thought was that they observed that all nature around us undergoes change, and held that one cannot speak the truth about that which is undergoing change. So a fortiori, nothing true could be said about what was changing at all points in all ways. It was from the seedbed of such thinking that there flowered the most extreme of the views we went through above. This is the position of those who appropriated the legacy of Heraclitus, notably of Cratylus. His mature position was that speech of any kind was radically inappropriate, and that expression should be restricted exclusively to the movement of the finger. He was appalled that Heraclitus had claimed that you could not step twice into the same river. In his Cratylus opinion, it was already going too far to admit stepping into the same river once. We, however, shall adopt the following line with all this. Okay, there is a kind of point in saying that what changes, when it is actually changing, is not. And yet, in fin descumptis, this conclusion can be resisted, for the property bearer that is discarding a property retains some part of that which it is discarding. And similarly, of that which comes into being, there must already have been something. Quite generally, for every case in which a thing is destroyed, there will be in that case something that is, and for every case in which something comes into being, there must necessarily be something from which it is produced, and something by which it is produced. And it is also necessary that an infinite regress not be generated. Even, however, if we refrain from this sort of solution, we must still distinguish changing in quantity from changing in quality. Nothing, let us allow, persists quantitatively, whereas it is by its persistent form that each thing is known. Anyway, a rap on the knuckles is surely earned by anyone who, perceiving things to be thus in what is in any case the statistical exception even of sensibles, extrapolates to the entire universe. Our little corner of the observable universe is unique in its constant exposure to birth and decay. It is an entirely negligible component of the universe as a whole. The verdict of a fair judge would be that our part can be left off because of the good behavior of the rest rather than vice versa. And why should we not also use against these opponents the same line that we originally took? It must be demonstrated to them that there is a kind of unchanging nature. This is a belief that they must acquire. Anyway, if you say that all things simultaneously both are and both are not, you should say rather that everything is at rest than that everything is in motion. There is no possible destination of change. What what with everything already being a property of everything else. On the truth question, then, we reject the doctrine that whatever appears is true. We have several reasons for doing this. The first is that even if special sensation is veridical, appearance production is not the same thing as sensation. Next, can this really be the issue whether magnitudes are equally great and colors of the same character as they appear at a distance or as they appear nearby, and whether they are as they appear to those who are healthy and to those who are ill, and whether things are relatively heavy as they so appear to the weak or to the strong, and whether those things are true that appear to those asleep or to those awake. Clearly, at any rate, they do not take it to be the issue. None of them, I suppose, would, if while in Libya he dreamt that he was in Athens, set off in the morning for Odeon, and as far as the future is concerned, a point made by Plato is that the opinion of the doctor and that of the lay person are by no means on the same footing with regard, shall we say, to whether someone will recover or not. Next, consider the senses themselves. A sense does not enjoy the same cognitive autonomy with regard to a non-proprietary or merely related object as with regard to its proper object. Rather, sight, not taste, has jurisdiction over color and taste, not sight over flavor. And it is never the case that each of these senses asserts of the same thing at the same time, that it both is and is not. Indeed, not even at different times is there disagreement between them about the affection itself, but only about that to which it applies. What I mean is that the same wine, say, might be deemed, under appropriate changes, either in its state or in that of the body of the drinker, to be now sweet, now not sweet, but the sweetness at the time when it was sweet does not change ever, and the sense remains always right about that, and its sweetness is the same as that of anything that will become sweet in the future. And yet it is just this that all these arguments undermine, with their claim that since nothing has a substance, there is nothing that is of necessity. Since the necessary does not admit of being both F and not F, there being something of necessity is incompatible with its being both F and not F. In general, if the only thing that is the sensible object, the absence of ensouled beings would mean the existence of nothing, given that no sensation would be taking place. But while the claim that in such circumstances there would be no sense objects and no sensations is very likely true, for they are both things that happen to some perceiver, it is an absurdity to argue that the underlying things that give rise to the sensation do not exist unless the sensation exists. In sensation, the subject is not presented with the sensation itself, but there is rather something else over and above the sensation which is necessarily prior to the sensation. For that which produces change is by nature prior to that which undergoes it, a fact not diminished by their being treated as correlative terms. But this brings us to the real rub for this position. Author's note again, or translator's note, Gamma 6. The polemic against the followers of Protagoras continues, as does the different treatment of serious and eristic objections. The main lines of Aristotle's arguments against Protagoras are as follows. If anyone claims that whatever appears is, he must accept that everything is relative. Even if he does, he will have to acknowledge that things do not appear absolutely, but only relative to particular observers, times, etc. When this is fully accepted, even the equation of appearance and being does not pose a threat to the principle. If the opponent continues Aristotelic to reject this, he will either have to accept that everything is relative, which is in fact absurd, or allow that there is something true or false irrespective of what anybody thinks. Moreover, the structure of thinking about something requires that there be a thing thought about as well as a thing thinking. That's the end of the author's note or the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics right now. Now, among both the serious and the frivolous proponents of these views, there are those who are fond of the following conundrum: who is to identify the healthy man, or more generally, the standard-setting cognizer of each topic. All questions of this kind are like the question whether we are currently asleep or awake. They all have the same dialectical force to require an explanation of everything. What they are after is a foundation. To be apodeictically grasped, and their behavior makes it clear that they do not yet think that they have just found it. Anyway, what is wrong with them is what we have just said. They want an account of things for which there is no account. The starting point of a proof is not a proof. Well, anyone troubled by these difficulties can be readily convinced by these arguments, which in truth are not hard to grasp, whereas those who seek nothing but composition in argument are asking for the moon. They claim the right to be contradictory, and the claim is itself contradictory. In any case, if all things are not relational, and there are some things that are what they are per se, then it will not be the case that all appearances are true. After all, what appears to some subject, and anyone who says that all appearances are true is making all things thus relational. Hence, anyone who is looking for a knockdown argument here, and also is willing to be subjected to scrutiny, has to fence himself by shifting from the claim that all appearances are true, simplicator, to the claim that all appearances are true relative to a subject, time, sense, and context. Any other attempt to defend the position will lead immediately to contradiction, for something can seem honey to the sight but not to the taste, or given what we have two eyes, things may not seem the same to the sight of them both in the event of their being dissimilar. For to those who assert the truth of appearances, for the reasons given above, and for this reason all things to be equally true and false, for neither do all subjects share the same appearances, nor does the same subject at all times. In fact, the same subject often experiences opposite appearances at the same time. As touch says there are two things, in a crossing of fingers and sight one, but there is nothing that appears differently to the same sense in the same respect, and in the same way and at the same time. So at least this claim would be true, so perhaps eristic. As opposed to sincere, defenders of this position must for this reason shift to the claim that not a given thing is true, but that it is true for some subject. And of course, as pointed out earlier, they will have to make all things relational, and relational to opinion and sensation, so that nothing will either come into being or exist if there is nothing to have an opinion about it. If, however, things have come to be, or will be, it is clear that all things cannot be relational to opinion. Moreover, if something is one, then it is so either in relation to some one thing or in relation to a definite number of things. Or if the same thing is both half and equal, that does not mean that the equal is relational to the double. If then, in relation to that which is thinking about it, a man and that which is thought to be a man are the same, then it will turn out not to be the one doing the thinking, but the one that is the object of thought that is the man. And if each entity is relational on a subject, then the subject itself will be relational, and to a formal infinity. Our discussion has reached three conclusions. 1. The most secure of all beliefs is that mutually contradictory statements cannot be jointly true. We have shown what happens to you if you deny one. Uh, 3. We have diagnosed the motivation of philosophers for denying one. But if we accept the contradictions that if we accept that contradictions cannot be jointly true of the same thing, it is also clear that nothing can jointly have opposite properties. For one of a pair of contraries is as much a privation as a contrary, and a privation of a substance, and privation is negation with regard to some determinate genus. So if it is impossible both to assert and to deny truly at the same time, then it is also impossible for opposite properties to pertain simultaneously, unless the two properties pertain in different ways, or one qualifiedly and the other simplicator. Another author's note, or translator's note, Gamma 7. Aristotle passes on to the defense of the principle of excluded middle, which is closely connected to the principle of non-contradiction. The principle of excluded middle states that between two contradictory propositions there can be no third proposition. Aristotle employs 7 arguments in defense of the principle, with the same strategy of distinguishing between serious and heuristic objections and of demanding from the opponent only the making of at least one proposition. In the last part of the chapter, Aristotle castigates both Heraclitus for making everything true and Anaxagoras for making everything false with his doctrine of the primordial mixture. Now, so that's the end of the translator's note, or author's note, so we're back to the metaphysics. So let's go. Now, it is also the case that there can be nothing intermediate to an assertion and a denial. We must either assert or deny any single predicate of any single subject. The quickest way to show this is by defining truth and falsity. Where falsity is the assertion that which is not, or that which is not is, and truth is the assertion that which is, and that which is not is not. Thus, anyone who asserts anything to be or not to be is either telling the truth or telling a falsehood. On the other hand, neither that which is said either not to be or to be nor is that which is not. And if there were an intermediate of contradictory statements, then it would either be like gray between black and white, or like the non-man, non-horse between man and horse. Suppose the latter, in that case, it could not change into either one or the other of what it stands between. For change to good is from not good, and to the latter from good, whereas in fact it appears always to do so. In fact, change can only be to opposites and intermediaries. If, then, we suppose that it is a real intermediary, there would still be something like the coming to be of white and from not white. And this is in fact never observed. Again, thinking either asserts or negates every object of thinking or of intuition. This much is clear from the definition whenever it engages in truth or falsity, and when in its assertion or negation it connects the term in a certain way, it is saying what is true, and when it does so in another way, it is saying what is false. In any case, all opposites, unless merely gratuitously proposed, must have an intermediary. Hence, one might be saying something that is neither true nor false, and there might be something that neither is nor is not, and there might be some change that is neither a coming into being nor a destruction. Also, for whatever generic negation of an attribute implies assertion of its opposite, there will also turn out to be an intermediary even here. So that in number, for instance, there might be some number that is neither odd nor not odd, which would be, given the definition odd, also an infinite regress looms. And we will have to raise the stock of entities not just by half but by more, for it will be in turn possible to negate the intermediate in terms of either assertion or denial, and yet it will be something, given that its substance is different from that of the others. And if someone is asked whether something is white and replies that it is not, he has not denied anything other than its so being, and this not so being is a negation. Some philosophers have fallen into this opinion in the same way that they have into other paradoxes. They are confronted by an Aristotle argument, find it impossible to refute, and end up by giving in to it and accepting its conclusion. This explains the confusion of some, while that of others is to be ascribed to the search for an explanation of everything. In either case, the basis of the cure is definition, and our definition arises from the necessity that words have some meaning, for the definition is the account of which the world is the sign, of which the word, not the world, word is the sign. Thus, while the remark of Heraclitus that all things are and are not effectively renders all assertions true, that of Anaxagoras that there is an intermediary between assertion and negation makes all assertions false. For if things are mixed, then the mixture will, for instance, be neither good nor not good, and it would be impossible to say anything true of it. Author's note or translator's note. Gamma 8. Aristotle concludes a book devoted to logic by rejecting two claims which both amount to a rejection of the principle of non-contradiction. First, he deals with those who claim either that everything is true or that everything is false. Each of these claims is in fact self-destructive. If everything is true, then so is the denial that everything is true. And if everything is false, then so is the claim that everything is false. Secondly, he also refutes those who claim either that everything is at rest or that everything is in motion. That everything is not at rest is shown by the fact that the very proponent of the claim himself came into existence at some time in the past. And that everything is not in motion is shown by the fact that for anything to be in motion, there must be something which is not in motion. And also by the fact that there are some things that are eternal. In fact, in Aristotle's view, to be defended at greater length in Book Lambda, there is something permanently in motion, something permanently moving, and the primary cause of motion, which is itself permanently motionless. Given all these distinctions, end of the author's or translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Given all these distinctions, it becomes clear that things said in a unitary way cannot apply to all things. For instance, some say that nothing is true. They claim that there is nothing to stop all statements being like the claim that the diameter of the square is commensurate with its side, and the others claim that everything is true. Their positions are pretty much the same as that of Heraclitus, since anyone who says that all things are true and all things are false is also separately asserting each of the two conjuncts, so that if they are indeed impossible, then so must the conjunction be. In any case, there are also some contradictions that clearly cannot be jointly true, nor indeed all false. Yet this would seem rather to be a possibility on the present assumptions. But in the face of all these reasonings, the position to be adopted is that already outlined above. We should require not that something is or is not, but that something has meaning, so that the argument should proceed from a definition. Through a grasp of the meaning of truth and falsity, if truth be nothing other than the assertion of what it is falsity to negate, then it is impossible that all things can be false. Since one half of the pair of contradictories must be true, indeed these arguments themselves fall victim to the very difficulty about which their defenders are always canting. They effectively destroy themselves, for if anyone says that all things are true, then he is making even the negation of his own claim true, so that his own statement in turn is not true. That is, after all, what its negation asserts. Or if anyone says that all things are false, then he is making his own claim to be false. And if the first claimant accepts the contradiction of his claim on the grounds that it alone is not true, and the second accepts his own claim as not as not being false. Nevertheless, they still require an infinite number of statements to be true and false. Since the statement that says the true statement is true, and so on ad infinitum. It is, by the way, similarly clear that all those who say that all things are at rest, or that all are in motion, are also wrong. For if all things are at rest, then the same statements will always be true and false. But it is clear that they change. Indeed, the speaker himself was not at some time in the past, and will not be again at some time in the future. But if all things are in motion, then nothing will be true. So all things will be false. But it has been shown that this is impossible. Also, that which is must change, since change is from something to something. Also, it cannot be that all things are sometimes at rest or in motion, but nothing always. For there is something that always moves the things in motion, and the first mover is itself unmoved. That is the end of book Gamma. The next book is book Delta.